and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in a clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm going to have fun tonight. I have all the way from Woonsocket, however that is pronounced, Rhode Island. I have a guest, Paul Eno, in studio, drove up here. But before we start with Paul, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with UFO Updates. I want to thank everyone that supports the show very much. And if you can't support the show, but you'd love to listen to the full show, you can come to podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening. Also, you can go to YouTube every Wednesday evening and watch us and do the show live. That's a 2-hour show. Or you can listen on the Dark Matter Digital Network on Thursday evenings from 10 to midnight. And that's it for me. And I'm going to bring in my good buddy in Arizona, Alejandro Rojas. You look a little different, Alejandro.
This is a desert whale. Hey,
Hey.
I'm actually at my house. We can do lifestyles of the UFO nerd.
All right. Oh, yeah.
There's my living room.
How about that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So people just don't know what they're missing when they don't watch our YouTube live stream.
How's that? How's this shot? You got a good shot there?
Sort of, yeah. You're a little off screen, but I can fix that. There you go. Perfect. Right there. Do not move. All right. Welcome to the show, Alejandro. How are you?
Good.
Good?
I can move a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You can talk if you want to. So
cool. Good. Well, I'm doing well. Always good to see you and your guests and Paul, which is a cool guest. I've been on Paul's show, I think, a couple times, and he's a lot of fun. So, and I remember you saying that he lives nearby, and you get to run into him occasionally at different events, and so that sounds like a lot of fun. So, and you've had him on before as well, right?
Oh yeah, a number of times. Yeah, he's 3 hours drive from me. That's what it took him to get here. It's not that bad.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not that bad.
Yeah.
Especially when people win contests to be able to join you in studio.
Oh yes, that was last week. That was last week.
Last week,
yes.
Yeah. That was pretty funny. And little did he know, he became an impromptu guest for you.
Yeah, that's
for
right.
A few minutes there.
Yeah. So that worked out okay, though. And it was a great, by the way, last week, if you haven't listened to it and you're watching or listening to the show tonight, was an awesome show with Selma Siddiq, one of the Ariel School witnesses, and it's getting a lot of downloads, a lot of feedback. It was a great show, one to be proud of, actually. I was very happy to have her on. I'm not saying I'm proud of the show, but I'm just saying I was honored to have her on the show. That's a better way to put it. It was great. She totally expressed herself perfectly, I thought, on exactly what happened.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. So what's going on with UFO news this week?
Well, what's going on with UFO news? We talked about the Newsweek thing last week on your show, right?
No, I believe we only talked about it on your show.
Oh, okay. See how prepared we are
right.
when we do. So, yeah, this is really cool. Everybody can go to their local grocery store or Barnes & Noble, and you're going to be able to get off of the newsstand a special edition Newsweek called Life Beyond Earth, ? And you think, okay, cool. That ought to be the kind of stuff Martin and Alejandro are into because it's science and it's astrobiology and SETI and stuff like that. But no, it's UFOs and alien abductions and all of this sort of thing. In fact, there's only a couple science-based, really, the mainstream kind of stuff you would think you would see, like rovers and stuff like that, looking for microbes on Mars or what have you. But the majority of the thing is about UFOs, UFO history, alien abduction, all the different types of things related to alien abduction. And I almost forgot that I had worked with Newsweek on this and given them some photos and some quotes. So they have me in there. They have some of our photos from the UFO Congress, and they have some of our buddies. They've got like Yvonne Smith and John Greenwald. Kevin Randall has quite a few quotes in there. So all kinds of really interesting, great stuff. Some photos that I would die to have because, for instance, there's a photo of the Blue Book guys like General Ramey and Ruppelt and General Samford, a classic photo that I'm always looking for a better and better version of. They have this crisp, clean photo. They have these photos of Kenneth Arnold and all of these other amazing photos they got a hold to in this Newsweek. But they treat the topic just like any of their other stories. So they're very serious about it. They're not kind of debunking people as UFO weirdos or something.
Yeah.
So it's a great art. Have you gotten a copy?
I have not. I read your article, and I thought it was great. Also, they put your logo, everything of your podcast in there. That's wonderful.
They recommended my podcast. Unfortunately, not yours, but lucky for you, people find out about your podcast whenever they listen to mine.
Because I'm on your podcast, too.
Yep. Yeah. You're my last. In fact, this week you were Martin Goofy Willis.
That's right. I was telling Paul that. Yeah. Yeah. So, I don't know if I've ever said that is on my show that I actually help you out with the news on your show. So we kind of switch back and forth, which is a lot of fun.
We probably haven't talked
unusual,
about that in quite a while.
But fun. Yeah.
So I think that was kind of a big deal. Another kind of big deal is, well, there's been a lot about, so at the Tom DeLonge meeting, and see this kind of, a lot of people, this is such a waste of time and stuff, but here's an example of how there was some important stuff that came out of his press conference. And everybody's talking about this great case regarding the USS Nimitz.
Yes.
And I had Robert Powell on, and Robert Powell has been posting some of his research, and he did some great stuff on the SCU Facebook, the Scientific Coalition for Ufology Facebook. And he did some interesting stuff with FOIAs, but other people are as well. Jeremy Corbell was able to speak with one of the witnesses, and it confirmed that a video that was leaked was from this famous incident, and I guess I should tell people about it. Essentially, in 2004, the whole naval strike force around the Nimitz, because these things don't float by themselves, they've got a bunch of boats with them, and they all saw this object, this white object. They called it a tic-tac-toe. They felt it looked like that. They scrambled jets to chase this thing. Typical stories, like we've heard for decades. They try to chase the thing disappears. As soon as they're gone, the things reappear. That sort of thing happened. So at the Tom DeLonge thing, one of the ex-CIA guys who was like a deputy assistant to the director of DOD and all this stuff, he also spoke about this Nimitz case, essentially saying this is why someone of my stature, which is, in the upper echelons of the intelligence world, believes that the UFO mystery is a real thing. So, Jeremy Corbell's been working on this. He was on Coast to Coast. He had he's posted on his site that video that he confirmed was taken by one of the jets in that case. And we should be seeing more video and some more about this case. But a lot of stuff going on about this remarkable case from 2004.
So this happened in 2004. Is this kind of the first this has been talked about?
Well, Robert and some others ran across it because it was one of the pilots that was involved with this posted his X-Files experience. And essentially it was, we were out there and we chased this UFO. We don't know what the heck it was. And that was the gist of his story. He posted this. Yeah, the Tic Tac UFO. He posted this story on a Navy pilot website, kind of blog. Wow. So it wasn't in a UFO thing or anything. It was for pilots. And it had created somewhat of a buzz when he posted that. And there's been some talk of it here and there. Robert's been looking into it for a while. I believe Jeremy has as well. I think he got a hold of it through Bigelow's group, actually.
Really?
So they had looked into it as well. George Knapp, I think, is the one who caught wind of it. So, there's been some people looking into it. But now, since his name is Chris Mellon, who you've had on your show, spoke about this at the press conference, now it's become a really big deal.
Yeah. I had an email today, and I haven't really looked into this. Someone said, how come Chris Mellon has taken a 190-degree turn from your podcast? And I didn't understand that comment, and I want to look into exactly what he's saying.
I think I know what people are saying.
Okay.
And I think that, this field is a lot more nuanced than just, are you a believer or a non-believer? And a lot of people struggle with that. I get that a lot. People saying, well, you don't really believe in UFOs. What makes you think that? I'm not a skeptic just like debunking everything. I certainly believe there's a genuine mystery. And so a lot of people feel that if you don't believe in everything, there's chemtrails and alien abductions and everything, then you're not into this stuff. So like what Chris expressed to you, he's certainly on the skeptical side, but he believes there's a genuine mystery when it comes to UFOs. He said that on your show. He said that all along. And I don't think he's ever really changed that position. He's just demonstrating in this instance a case that supports that belief, but he's certainly still on the skeptical end of things, where he needs a lot more proof and evidence to figure out what these are, especially before he jumps to a conclusion such as that they're extraterrestrial spacecraft.
Yeah, I get that. I get all that. Yeah. So anything else?
Get it. But I think the person that was asking you the question did not get it.
I love the finger. By the way, is that? I think I see a UFO up by your head. Over. I mean, if you look.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, see the UFO right
Holy.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Uh-oh. He's on the floor. He's back.
No, this is that's a speaker, a surround speaker.
Wow,
So
surround speaker. Pretty.
Yeah, look, if we
posh
can,
place. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I like the digs you have there. Very nice.
I am.
So
look, there's my kitchen.
So this is why you have to watch video. Yeah.
There's the front surrounds, and then the rear surrounds.
Fish, porcelain fish. Yeah.
Fish. They're actually wood.
Oh, well.
I've got kind of a beachy feel going here.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks for the tour. So anything else happening in the UFO world?
You know what? Those are the big stories that are out there. There's a few other things going on. There's some stories around. Again, what's kind of cool is Cheryl Costa, who has written a book on UFO sightings. There's been some more stories about her and her book. In fact, Fox News did a story, but they went with New Forks information, and it's similar to what's been done before, but the top 25 cities for UFO sightings. Another thing that's kind of exciting that's out there that's getting a lot more buzz is that Josh Gates has been doing on Expedition Unknown a series on UFOs and aliens and hunting UFOs, and the newest ones are a little exciting because Ben Hansen is going to be in it.
Oh, good.
And also, of Factor Faked, he's a cool guy, a friend. And then also, they're going to be doing the Roswell special, which I'm interested in because I know that they did some research that is new and everybody's been looking for, but I don't know what they found yet, so I'm excited to find that out. And I got to ride on the float with Josh Gates at the parade in Roswell, so I'm hoping maybe I get a little bit of screen time on that episode.
Right. Hey,
and
maybe
I think
you
that
will.
might be tonight. Yeah,
All
I
right.
think that episode's on tonight. If not tonight, I know it's on very soon.
Excellent. All right, man. Well, thanks so much, and I'll talk to you next week on your show. And
all right, my pleasure.
And have you back next week on this one too. All right,
All
you
right.
take care. Thanks for the little tour of your house. Yeah.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming on by and kicking your feet up and visiting in my home here.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye-bye. All right, so our guest tonight, good friend, again, came all the way up from Woonsocket. He's going to tell me the right way to say that. Woonsocket.
Woonsocket.
All right. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Oh, thank
Try
you.
to see if we can scoot in a little more.
There we go.
Here we are. Look at this green screen going.
Yep.
All right. So thank you for making the trip up.
Oh, you're very welcome.
We're supposed to
Great
stare
pleasure.
ahead. Yeah, I guess we have to stare ahead. So anyway, for the person that is unfamiliar with who you are, which isn't a lot of people that are regular listeners because you've been on what? Oh, by the way, people that are watching this show, this is a real rare occasion. A lot of times I wear a tie for work, but this is the bow tie, how Paul came. So, I couldn't be outdone, and I don't have a bow tie. I've never been able to figure out how to tie a bow tie. You want to take a few minutes and tie that bow tie for me? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Okay.
I need a mirror.
Yeah,
Well, I
a
suppose
mirror,
that's
right.
a mirror.
Yeah. All right. So welcome to the show. And,
Thank you very much.
Please tell the listening audience a little bit about yourself, your background.
Well, all right, if you insist. I started out in 1970 while I was studying for the priesthood, and I was very curious about the ghost phenomena that is present in every culture throughout history, and I proceeded to attempt to study that from the viewpoint of theology, which was bizarre because I was really young. And my first case took me to places that gave me the indication that these people were not dead at all, never mind being in purgatory, which is what I thought was going on. So that led to a number of very, very strange cases, some of which, as time went on, as I began to look beyond a certain house or family, led to UFOs in some cases. And led even to cryptids, Bigfoot and all that sort of thing sometimes. So it just got bigger and bigger, so that now, and my son joined me in 2005, my son Ben, and so we specialize now in flap areas of seemingly unrelated but unrelenting paranormal phenomena of many different kinds. So that's essentially where we're coming from, and we have a lot of weird ideas that go beyond, I think, the 19th century ideas of what is happening in the ghost world and perhaps in the UFO world too.
Yes. On the Everything Else show, I had David Hall on, and he talked about the house where you were actually at, where you saw these things, the 400-pound refrigerator or 200-pound, whatever it was, lift off the ground and all that. You actually saw this stuff.
In the presence
I know this is a UFO show, but I just think that is amazing.
Well, it's very relevant you bring that up, Martin, because it was in the presence of 3 firefighters on one side of me and 3 police officers on the other. And I just had, now of course I was a 21-year-old seminary student. I was working with Ed and Lorraine Warren of the Conjuring fame. And I just was getting the impression that what we thought was going on, which was demons, we were sitting around this house for 3 days with a priest waiting for the Bishop of Bridgeport, Connecticut, to give us permission to do an exorcism. And I just felt there were 4 alien entities in this house. I cannot think of a better word to describe what I got from and I had a physical struggle with one of them, which sounds very strange because it threw me for a loop, because this is supposed to be a spirit, and
can you describe that exactly? What do you mean?
Sure. Well, we came in, this is November 25th, 1974, and the previous day was a Sunday. I was on my way down to the Warrens' house. Lorraine, a tremendous cook, and I was home from the seminary for Thanksgiving vacation, and I never got my dinner because she came leaping out of the house as soon as I drove up and said, "Are you in a high spiritual state right now?" And I was not by any means. I was considering leaving the Roman Catholic Church, as a matter of fact. So I said, "Sure, I'm fine," So naturally, down we went, and I ended up with the better part of 3 days in this house with them. But there was one on Monday night, the next night, the 25th. They had left to be on some television show, and I was alone in the house with the family, which was a couple in their 40s and their adopted little girl, Marcy, 10 years old,
right.
A neighbor and a reporter, John Sopko from the Bridgeport Post. All of a sudden, the kitchen filled with some sort of energy, and you could almost see sort of a gauzy cloud in the kitchen. Several other weird things happened, including Mr. Gooden, who was a blue-collar worker at the Harvey Hubble Company, which makes electrical fixtures, in Bridgeport, went into the kitchen and started chanting in a low bass voice what sounded to me something from a funeral mass, okay? And it was later told to me that this was the funeral mass for children. I heard it, and whoever told me that didn't hear it. So anyway, 4 entities, I can only describe them as entities, came out of the little girl's room next to the kitchen, up the hallway, one of them, and you could almost see this gauzy structure coming out, and one of them stood in front of me. I put the little girl behind me, Marcy, and because I knew it was after her. And this is where I learned the hard way that you do not get fearful, annoyed, or angry with these things, because they will feed off of this. They aren't servants of Satan. We believe that they're multiversal parasites, a part of nature, perhaps undiscovered science. So I naturally pushed against it just instinctively, as you would do. It pushed back. It had a bone structure, a physical. I was absolutely thrown for a loop, because it smashed all my preconceived notions, including what I learned in the seminary, which wasn't much about this subject, because they don't really teach you this stuff. And so as I was confused, it got around me and threw the little girl across the room. But these were alien beings. As I say, I cannot think of a better word to describe them. And today we consult with several of the names, including our good friend Kathy Martin, on crossover phenomena. When people are experiencing abductions, things of this kind, and all of a sudden poltergeist activity starts taking place in their house. So they start seeing strange things that would not ordinarily be associated with the UFO phenomenon. So I think we're dealing with a tip of the iceberg in the case of even an abduction experience, or a ghost, or even Bigfoot. I think that there's far more to it. And if you look at Rendlesham Forest, places of that kind, which is a true flap area, and you talk to the local people, which most investigators don't do, you find it is the tip of the iceberg indeed, and the things have been going on there since Saxon times, and they still are, including binary codes, Bigfoot, or Yeti as they call it. We ourselves had some strange experiences there, we being Ben and myself. So I think it's, in a way, the first day of school here. But in that house in Bridgeport was my opening day as far as new ideas were concerned.
I want to talk a little bit about what you just said about binary codes, but before that, this entity that kind of smacked into you, basically. And you said you felt like it had a bone structure. A couple of questions. Did it feel like it had any type of temperature at all, cold or warm? Did you smell any odors? Did it feel like there was a present, like a being right there in front of you?
That's a good question. Definitely a being in front of me. The air smelled like ozone, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And as far as the temperature, obviously I was fully dressed, so I didn't feel anything through the thing, but it wasn't, didn't suck all the cold, the warm air out of the room. As a matter of fact, in 47 years of tangling with ghosts, quote unquote, only once have I experienced that feeling, which is very odd. Everyone points to that as a fundamental experience as far as dealing with a ghost. The air everything gets cold and everything. And only once can I say that really in a very pronounced manner did that occur, and that was in Manchester, Connecticut in the 1970s, not Bridgeport. Very strange that way.
Wow.
Can't really explain it.
Wow. Back to the binary code, why I wanted to talk about that. I've always been I've invited Jim Peniston on this show a couple of times. He's said he's going to come eventually, but he just hasn't made the jump. But one of the things I want to talk to him about is that binary code, because I'm on the fence about that. So I want to find out what you have to say about that.
Well, we know Jim, I suppose, as well as anyone who hasn't met him. He's been on our show a number of times. Although my bubble was burst, I thought we had done on Behind the Paranormal 16 hours at least of interviews and podcasts with all the major witnesses. And apparently someone else has done, I think it's Paracast, I think has done more than we have. But however, we've done a lot. And Jim came out and talked about this. And we like Jim, but I had a few questions as to if this occurred in 1980, how come he waited so long to talk about it and wrote down the thing? And I suppose, I don't think I would have done the same thing. I mean, if this came into my mind, I was writing down these codes that according to the researchers, have turned out to be coordinates, geographical coordinates, among other things. Why would you wait? So I don't know. So I'm on the fence about it too, I guess, Martin. Again, I wasn't there. However, when we were there in 2012, Ben and myself, and we sort of did some exploring. We had a lot of local listeners who took us around, who were also people who had experienced things in Rendlesham Forest. And the very first night we were there, Ben, he operates sort of on a different level than I do. I tend to be more maybe academic as much as you can be in this field, but Ben is more experiential. And he collapsed in the parking lot, because this is at night, and dogs began howling up and down the road, including the dog who was with us, who belonged to Gordy Goodyear, the promoter who had us there. And he will go through it's almost a shamanic experience, and he'll go through this, and he won't entirely remember what happens or how long it's been, but some other strange things have happened. But so that happened, and then the people told us, I'm thinking particularly Brenda Butler and the Beverly Plumbridge, people of that area, have said that they have been in the forest and felt they have had binary downloads, even long before Jim released his story about this. So it's a tip of the iceberg. You can trace it back to Saxon times. There are some very strange photographs taken in there, including the night we were there. So it's again one of those things that it wasn't just December 1980, and other people have reported strange lights. Everything that was reported pretty much in December of 1980 has been reported, with the possible exception of people, touching craft like Peniston said he did. So
yes, there was someone out there that was saying that a girlfriend had that book for a while, and prior to a certain time, there was never any binary code in that book. I don't know how true that is. In other words, it was written in at a later time.
Yeah.
But again, that's all hearsay. So I have no idea. If I had him on the show, I'd ask him that question. But also, just to let the listener know, anytime during the show, we are going to welcome call-ins. That's something I normally don't do since we're in studio. Anyone that wants to call in, ask a question, talk a little bit about maybe an experience or a UFO sighting or anything like that, you're welcome to do that. That number, I'll put it in the chat room too, 603-967-4030. If you're calling from another country, it's 1-603-967-4030. Why don't you talk quickly about your show that you've had? I think you have 700 some odd shows or free podcasts out there.
Yeah, we're in our 10th year. It's Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, and we were on CBS radio for 4.5 years, and then they closed down that part of the network. So our home right now is WOON 1240 in the Boston Providence market, and the website is behindtheparanormal.com. There are over 720 hours, if you have the time, of shows since 2008. If you're an over-the-road trucker, you have it made, because you can listen forever, and people tell us they actually do that. They must have headaches by the time they get to L.A., I would think. So also there are instructions about how to listen live if you're not in the Boston Providence area, and there are a couple of apps and this sort of thing. And the show has a stream. And now you have the jarring experience of seeing the video as well of us in the studio, which is very boring, I think, if you don't have an in-studio guest. However, much like the heart-pounding experience we're having here, if we have someone in the studio, then it's far more interesting. But our first one was with Shane Searway, very dear colleague of ours and co-host of our Open Line show. So we had that from Sunday. So behindtheparanormal.com, and check the archives page. It's all free. And
also, it's kind of funny here. You can't tell this, but the studio is very, very small here, very tiny.
What's that?
Yeah. And what did Rodney Dangerfield used to say, that his bedroom was so small he had to go outside of it to change his mind? That's kind of how small.
Well, there isn't that much room in these spacecraft, so you have to.
Yeah, that's right. Easy. Yeah. So anyway, I like it that way. way. So it's good. But anyway, can you also talk about, have you yourself had any UFO experiences?
Well, people always ask me, they ask me, are you an experiencer? And I say, well, no. And they say, well, sure you are. You run into alien poltergeists in Bridgeport and bear-like visitors in attics near Buffalo, New York, this sort of thing. And so, yeah, I suppose, and a lot of with our view of the multiverse, as it's been called, we're running into alien creatures all the time in the sense of very other sorts of creatures. But I've never really, we've seen odd things in the sky, particularly in the Litchfield Triangle in Connecticut, as we call it. There was a period in 2009, 2010 when people in Goshen, Connecticut would get out of their cars at night and just watch these weird lights in the sky, which Ben and I ourselves have seen. I also saw the Phoenix lights from an airplane.
You did?
Apparently, yes. That was in, I believe it was 06 or 07. Ben and I were on the way to San Diego to do a presentation there, and we were flying over Phoenix. And of course, the thing is, you're zip bang, I don't know how many hundreds of miles an hour, and you're 33,000 feet. But I happened to be one of the few people awake, and I looked out of the window, and there down below, and it's very, especially at night, very difficult to estimate altitude, but I would say maybe about 10,000 feet. There was a line of lights, 4 lights. 2 of them split off. One looked as though it was going toward the ground. And then, of course, we got to San Diego, and it said in the paper the next day they'd seen the Phoenix lights the night before. So presumably that's what it was, between the city and the mountains. And, I spent 12 years reserve, albeit, but a lot of active duty in the military. I know what a flare looks like, and this was not it.
Yeah.
So,
well, the curious thing about the Phoenix lights is they actually did set off flares. And I've always wondered, I've never heard a definitive of this, but I always wondered if they did that purposely to throw people off away from, the event that was happening.
Well, that's what you do. I mean, in the military, I had a clearance, not very high, but, enough to realize, pick up some tips. What you often do is to create diversionary phenomena or whatever, or rumors or things of this kind, and get people looking the other way. I think they realized a long time ago, at least in the 60s, that you really can't keep secrets anymore. You really can't keep the lid on things, especially now in the age of the internet. I could just imagine, it's a 3-ring circus as far as trying to do that. So you release accurate information from less than accurate sources and vice versa. And everybody loves a mystery, and people are looking the other way. So, I don't know. I always thought that in some ways the UFO story was in some cases a ruse for covering up something else. And I really, until I was chased across the desert outside Area 51 in 2007, when I was supposed to be speaking in Vegas. That's kind of a long story, but I mean, that was a bit much.
So tell me about that. Did you actually try to put your feet on? I know you can actually walk on that. They have sensors and everything.
Yeah, no, I didn't. What happened was that it was I was supposed to speak. Everything went wrong this week. I was supposed to be speaking at the MGM Grand, and they had 300 people signed up to hear me speak. And then there was a blizzard in New England here, and I couldn't get. I was a day late, so they had like 20 people show up. They rescheduled. It was really, really bad. Then I got poisoned, I guess, by the shrimp or something. And then I'm in the room, and no matter how nice the hotel, drives you buggy after a while. So
yeah,
I figured it was my last day. I'm going to go out. I had a rental car. So I'm going to go up to Rachel, Nevada. It's about 175 miles, which for them is not much.
Yeah, right.
And,
they're used to it.
Yeah. So and get a few cheesy souvenirs at the Little Alien from my sons, who are all into this. So off I went. Of course, immediately you get off the highway, there's no cell service, at least at the time. So I got to the part, the road kind of splits off, and there's a sign, they put it there for the tourists, extraterrestrial highway. And there were some trees and a couple of cars parked there. So I didn't pay any attention to that. I'll take a picture of the sign. They got all, the stickers all over it people have put. And, thousands of people must take pictures of that sign. So all of a sudden, I looked to my right, where the road forks off, and there was a vehicle with U.S. government plates, a white SUV. And when I got thrown out of the seminary, I ended up in journalism and became a reporter. So I couldn't help it. So I put the camera up, and the finger comes up, like a look that would curdle Coca-Cola. And so I put the camera away and started off down the road where the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, much to my amazement. And they started to follow me.
Wow.
And they were, it was at least 10 miles. They were like inches behind my bumper. At least that's what they looked like. And again, you know, I'm a veteran. I've been in some weird situations. And this really shook me up as much as anything ever did in the service. Finally, they got off the road and went down some dirt road into the wilderness, presumably toward the base. So I got to the little alien. It was a Wednesday morning. Nobody was around. And the lady in there said, "What happened to you?" And she said, "I told her." And then she knew who I was. And she said, "Oh, you were taking pictures of the park and ride for Area 51. I said, "Excuse me?" They said, I said, "Thousands of people must take pictures of that sign." "Oh, no, but they ran your plate. And they realized that you write about this stuff, and they put two and two together. They thought that you were trying to take pictures of the license plates and then bother people who worked at the base." I said, "I had no such, plus I have a rental car, so it didn't make any difference. You know, they know who rents it." So that was supposedly what it was all about. It happens rather frequently, she said.
Really?
They said, had you been off the road toward the base, they would have pulled you out of the vehicle, 45 automatic to the head, semi-automatic to the head, impound the vehicle, 24 hours maybe in jail, and scared you to death, and that would have, so had you been in the security zone. So, I mean, now I wonder, I mean, what the hay is really going on there?
That is really something. Going back to the Phoenix Lights, Carl in the chat writes, "Weird why there was not a great deal of convincing footage, photos, and video after the Phoenix Lights." I agree. I agree, too.
You know what I saw, too? And one of the principals in this thing sent me this, and there was actually footage of an airplane, like a Cessna, I couldn't tell in the dark, a Cessna or a Piper, with a triangle of lights under it, flying, which isn't even legal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, did you see that?
No.
Oh, yeah. There's, I don't know. I think she sent it to me by mistake, but I mean, that kind of really made me wonder. On the other hand, I mean, people did see this line of lights, and what I saw was no, small plane, and of course, especially because I was seeing it from above.
So that's kind of odd, because normally you would think a craft, like they described, it sounded like it had like these sort of amber orange lights on the underside, but you're saying you actually saw them from above.
If that's what it was, they were white.
They were white.
Yeah, and station. I mean, again, now this is flying by in a commercial aircraft.
But this was memorable enough for you to think about.
Yeah, because I'm a real skeptic about this stuff, and I just thought, and sure enough, if I hadn't gotten to San Diego the next day and found that they report that they'd seen the lights the night before, I might have been more skeptical. But this was very odd. For any kind of aircraft or any kind of operation. And as far as I know, there was nothing, under that area in the desert, and you would have been able to see them from the city. So, yeah. I mean, as a person I don't consider myself a UFO expert as such, this really struck me as something remarkable.
Wow. Yeah. That is really great. Let's see. So we're taking questions in the chat room if anyone wants to post them there. One of the topics I wanted to talk about, you were in the seminary. I wanted to talk about, and not make the whole show a theme about it, but just talk about religion versus UFOs.
Well, I get that a lot, and I didn't realize people were so interested in that subject, but I guess there aren't too many people in the paranormal field who actually have a formal theological education. One of the drawbacks of that on our show is that everybody blames me for not espousing their religious beliefs. Because I've come a long way from what I guess I learned in the seminary. However, there is a core of ancient tradition that is rather telling, I think. If you, for example, read Genesis in the original Hebrew, which is difficult because ancient Hebrew had no vowels, and it also had no spaces between the words. I mean, modern Hebrew has vowel marks, but it says an awful lot of awfully strange things. And if you read the Atrahasis of the Akkadian Empire, which most people have never heard of, but it was the first known empire, and also the Karsag epics of the Sumerians, they parallel the Genesis account of creation. And looking at it from now, I don't read Syriac or ancient Babylonian, but I can get by in Hebrew. I went and studied Hebrew specifically so I could read Genesis. It says things that it doesn't say in English. And one wonders, certainly, for example, the first verse of the Bible, essentially, of the book of Genesis is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Some say heaven and the earth. But if you read it a certain way in Hebrew, it can say, when it began, the shining ones stood upon the heights and looked down upon the highlands and the lowlands. The shining ones. The word Elohim is the oldest word in the Bible used for God. It's also used by other Semitic peoples in that area. It's the weirdest word in any Semitic language. It has a feminine root with a masculine plural ending. There's no other word like it. What is that about? It's certainly plural. So who were the shining ones? You know, and we could do 10 shows just on that subject. So you wonder if religion, maybe at least the religion of our remote ancestors, was not essentially sparked by experiences of beings they thought were supernatural beings. This is not a new idea. However, it may be. This may give it a more of a basis, because people obviously thought they were dealing with something supernatural. In a way, Martin, I think the paranormal is the mother of religion and science, because had there been no unanswered questions, had there been no mysteries to be solved, we would probably have neither religion nor science.
Wow.
And which of course brings us to the point that, in fact, this war between science and religion is largely a myth. It never happened until really the 19th century and the advent in the West of the literalist, fundamentalist Christian point of view, which took the Bible, as more literally than anybody had ever done before, as far as scientific points were concerned. So, I mean, this is another issue, but I think that ancient, I don't know, ancient astronauts, if they were that, ancient travelers from other dimensions or worlds may be partially responsible for this. One of the funny things is that in the human genome, when that was finally mapped in 2004, there were 223 genes that shouldn't be there if evolution as we understand it is correct. Where did they come from? Biologists always want to have an answer, so they postulate a quote, a horizontal transfer from bacteria, unquote. And I don't understand that. If you do, I mean, please say so. But so there are all these very, very odd things that happen. One of the things that may be telling is that were these actually alien beings, and if they did mess with our genome, they must have had, well, let me tell you how, in the Karsag epics, Nin Karsag, the mother goddess, takes blood and saliva, which are what? Primary DNA sources. And they use them to breed or to affect the native beings, peoples, presumably our remote ancestors, who were very, very primitive, in order to make them, I suppose you could argue, a slave race. So this, I'm not saying this is what it was, but it sure looks like it. So if we're dealing with and these are documents that have roots 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, and they're talking about what essentially is a DNA experiment of some kind. So if their DNA, they took DNA from themselves, from the blood and saliva of their own people. If that was the case, then their people must not have been different from us really at all. Unless they had fantastic technology for gene splitting, they would have had to be essentially human. So are we dealing with aliens from another planet, aliens from another time, whatever that may mean? And any scientist who works with that will tell you don't move back and forth in time, you move sideways. Does any of that have any kind of meaning for our very, very narrow paradigm? So, I mean, you tell me.
Well, so these genomes, is that what you said? There was
the human genome. It was finally mapped in 2004.
And there are 223
genes that shouldn't be there.
And their explanation is a bacterial transfer. It sounds.
That's one explanation from biology.
That's one explanation. Yeah. So are they still trying to find out any other explanation as far as?
Well, they are, but a lot of the work is not being publicized. much like the work at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider is not being publicized. Essentially, the missing genes, I should say the extra genes, had to do mostly with the brain, which is interesting. And so that's there's really no solid information that I've seen, and I keep looking for this because it's extremely important, I think. So.
It's kind of like the dark matter of genes, huh? In a way.
Well, in effect, that's it. I mean, essentially, as theories like dark matter are postulated by physicists or geneticists in this case, and used to plug holes in the knowledge, and they hope eventually to prove it. Yeah. Well, which is what that's a scientific, legitimate scientific method to use.
Yeah, like a place card in a way.
In a sense, yeah. And sometimes, usually, it'll come about, sometimes not, and then they have to think of some other stopgap. Right.
A couple of questions in the chat room. Waylon wants to know, let's see. Do you think that UFOs are more paranormal as opposed to alien beings?
Well, it depends what you mean by paranormal, and it depends what you mean by alien beings. As I said in this house, these poltergeists that were supposed to be demons, were alien. They were totally other alien beings, and they seem to be physical. As far as paranormal, I think would embrace the UFO realm. I think the term paranormal is a misnomer. I mean, paranormal it's entirely normal. It may be perhaps what our good friend Mark D'Antonio calls undiscovered science. On the other hand, it may be outside science. Our science, remember, is based essentially on the scientific method, which assumes, and this is a word I hate, assume. In ghost research, all the way to UFO research, all the way to science, we assume certain things are true, and we really don't know that. For example, the assumption in mainstream science is that everything is material. It's a philosophy known as scientific materialism. Everything is matter and based on the interactions with other matter, and that's where energy comes in. However, quantum mechanics has pretty much blown that out of the water, but the trouble with scientists, there are two problems in general with mainstream science. They don't talk to each other, different fields usually, and many of them are far more concerned with grants and tenure than they are with pushing the envelope. And maybe it's not fair of me to say that. My degree is in philosophy, and of course with a background in theology, but it just seems that this is really holding all of us back. So, but yeah, I think it's certainly within the realm of the paranormal, and alien beings are too. So I think we have to broaden perhaps our understandings and be very careful of the labels we put on things. You know, Martin, I've always thought very often in the field of whether it be ghosts or UFOs or whatever, the nature of the experience depends on what label we put on it, and that depends on the context of the experience. For example, if you're sitting in your living room and a wispy figure floats by, aha, a ghost. But if you're out in a field and there's a wispy figure with a ball of light over, aha, an alien, or at least a UFO. Uh-huh. And I think the narrowness of our own point of view may be our own shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to a broader understanding of what these are. But so I guess it's a big yes to everything that Waylon brings up.
Yeah, well, I understand what you're saying there. Do you give credence to the UFO cryptoid connection? That's from Just Banter in the chat.
That's funny. I just gave a lecture on that. Ben and I did at the Greater New England UFO Conference in Leominster, Mass. That the title of the lecture was "The Fur Flies?" Bigfoot and UFOs. There are a couple of zany cases that have been reported. I'm thinking particularly one in France in 1973, and it was in the Normandy area. It was winter, and a couple was parking, as we used to say in my day, out at the edge of the village there, and a craft that's shaped like an egg kind of came down, landed in this field, and out get your garden variety gray aliens that you would expect. And then out get two of the, what used to be called the Nordics, maybe they still are, I don't know, the taller, sort of blonde hair. And then out get something that looks an awful lot like dear old Bigfoot, who stands next to the craft the whole time while the others are doing what they were doing. Some of the triangle or flap area cases we investigate, almost all of them have involved Bigfoot, and particularly the one in Pennsylvania. We have neighborhood meetings. I had my own Bigfoot experience there while I was looking for strange lights in the sky, which is what I was expecting. After 47 years, you'd think, I know things never happen the way you expect them to. But these neighborhood meetings, we bring in up to 20 families. Every single person in the area has had a Bigfoot experience and has seen strange lights in the sky. And the question, are these alien craft? Are they living creatures of some kind? We suspect that many of the orbs, as they're called, that appear in photographs, particularly from digital media, may be living plasma-based life forms, something about which Carl Sagan speculated. Things not based on carbon as we are, but plasma and this sort of thing, simply appearing in these areas, perhaps feeding around the boundaries of parallel worlds. Physicists who believe it this way will call them brains, B-R-A-N-E-S, these
like membranes.
Like membrane, exactly.
Yep.
And we think that life is everywhere, it's every when, and we think that these balls of light may be feeding around these areas like that. Our good friend Ted Phillips from Missouri, who investigated the great Marley Woods case, very interesting situation there, believes that there's far fewer nuts and bolts craft, as people would report in the 40s and way back, and there are far more light balls, as he calls them, and he believes they may be probes and or living things. So the nature seems to be certainly changing, but as far as association with Bigfoot, where you find strange lights, you very often find Bigfoot. Another area in northern Massachusetts, in the Leominster area, is Monster Land. Okay, and
First
people
time I
have
heard
actually called it that for some time. And our good friend Ronnie LeBlanc has written a very good book on that called Monsterland, even has T-shirts with Monsterland on. And the kids would actually go out there to see things. Something would throw things at them from the woods if they were too noisy, and they would see all kinds of strange lights, particularly orange balls of light. And Ronnie has made it his life's work to really record instances of this. And where you see the orange balls of light, sometimes flying high in the sky, and sometimes close to the ground, there will be Bigfoot, usually, in his opinion. So it's, there certainly does seem to be a connection, regardless of how you interpret what the lights may be.
Now, one of the things, you going back to the brains, the multiple universes, the theories, the one thing that I don't get in that, they say that, okay, like, in this world you picked up a cup of coffee, in that world you didn't, and all these different things happen. But so you have to just follow me for just a second. So what I don't get is why would that be like that? I don't understand. And if so, then does that mean when you were conceived that in another universe you weren't conceived? And if so, why all the variables?
It's one of the hardest things to get your head around, I think, certainly. But this, in a way, brings us right back to theology in a strange. Now, everybody blames God. Okay, well, my cat died, so I hate God. Everybody, they have a very narrow view of God, just like they do everything else. But just for the fun of it, I mean, you could look at this whole multiverse idea. And what is one of the principles that is believed by many physicists when it comes to the multiverse, that it's not just a bunch of parallel worlds, but that every possibility does exist somewhere or somewhen in the multiverse in concrete reality. And as Einstein proved in 1952 with relativity, it's all simultaneous. There is no past, there is no future. And the universe in which you may be me, and there is such a place, as jarring as that realization may be, if this is correct, you're just as much you, and I'm just as much me. It's really rather all-embracing and really quite a pan-human experience. So if all possibilities exist, why aren't we aware of them? Well, if we become aware of them in our society where that possibility has not existed, you run into the people I ran into in psychiatric hospitals when I was a student. There were people who are judged to be schizophrenic, diagnosed as such. Today, they fill your pockets full of antipsychotic drugs. But in those days, I would encounter people who had the most knowing look in their eyes, would sometimes have the dissociative identity syndrome or multiple personalities with different voices coming out of this is not physically possible, really. And the doctors, one of the reasons I was there was I had a very sympathetic faculty at the seminary before the one that threw me out, and I was working with a diocesan exorcist. And I believe we were dealing with alien creatures. I mean, the whole demon thing just wasn't good enough as far as I was concerned. But it all had to do with the multiverse and various experiences and things that involved a bigger us than just right here. But it is hard to get your mind around. I think you have to feel it rather than grab it intellectually, Martin. You know, for example, I love to speak in colleges because they at the end, of course, the students have very intelligent questions usually. And at the end, they put me in a big armchair, you know, like Santa Claus or something, and all the young people come up and they tell me their stories. Well, I was at Mount Ida College outside Boston many years ago, and I got a kick out of that because half the students were studying to be undertakers. All right, and so two girls came up, freshman girls, and I'd been talking about human relationships in the multiverse, and they said, why is it that on day one, registration day, we saw each other across the crowded room and we were sisters from the start? They felt like they'd always known each other and they were great friends. I said, because if this is correct, then at some point in the multiverse, you are one another. The laws of physics may be different or whatever, but you are each other. They knew precisely what I was talking about, and they went scurrying off all happy because they thought that that's the explanation. So, I hope I believe that that's correct. And again, one of the things is that these universes have very different laws of physics, very different forms of life. And so the idea, are aliens from another planet, may not necessarily be meaningful question. They may be from another planet, but maybe they got here through the multiverse, or it's a planet in a different reality with different laws of physics. I mean, anything is possible, and that's the whole point of the multiverse. But it is tough to get your mind around. But as far as, you know, dropping the coffee cup, if all possibilities exist, then you would be born in one, not in the other, or you died in the UFO crash 30,000 years ago, and this sort of thing. So what does this do with God? Well, maybe. What do they teach us in catechism class and in the seminary or church school, Sunday school, whatever? The creation was a result of God's love that could not be contained. An infinite love that had to express itself, and that was the creation. Well, if it's an infinite love, why wouldn't it be an infinite creation? Why would there just be one universe? That doesn't make sense. So perhaps it really is a perfect creation, and with all possibilities there in perfect balance. And maybe just because it's not for our personal convenience, that doesn't mean that God is dumb or doesn't care or this sort of thing. You know, maybe it does. I don't know, but it's just. I think that there's a possibility that we don't consider that it really is a perfect creation, and we just have to discover it.
Yeah, or I don't think there'd ever be any way to really know myself. But I want to be in the universe where I know how to do the bow tie, and you're wearing the regular tie.
Well, so do I. One of our producers is a critic of my bow tie tying, so
I tried to tie one before.
Maybe perfect.
It's it's you have to be like a rocket scientist to do it. So we have some questions in the forum, and here's this one. Let's see, Carrie posted these. If humans are still around in, say, 1,000 plus years, do you have an opinion on some of the discoveries and knowledge we would have about the universe and life beyond Earth from where we are at our present time?
Well, a good basic meat and potatoes question. That depends. You have to qualify this because, if we blow ourselves up or are blown up by, an asteroid strike or something, which may have happened as many as 4 times in the past, according to some of the indigenous peoples we've rubbed elbows with, then probably we might be back with axes and chase whatever, with primitive. I think we've gone from stone tools to power tools, as it were, as many as 4 times, as they say. But barring that, I think that perhaps just looking around at what's happening, there seems to be more awareness of these interesting discoveries, particularly regarding physics and this multiverse or possible multiverse. And the word is being spread like fire tremendously by the internet. One of the things I think that is happening is that the internet is bringing people together. As divisive as it may seem, opinion-wise, I think that overall people don't think that people who live in other countries have horns. Maybe some do, but I mean, people are people. That in itself, I think, paves the way for knowledge and perhaps mutual learning. On the other hand, we don't seem to be taking very well to any sort of unity in that regard, but we'll see. I think a better understanding of our world will bring about more awareness of the multiverse. I think that it has all sorts of implications for our spirituality, for how we treat each other, for how we understand ourselves, certainly for our religions, and really even for government. I think that, but the fly in the ointment is something we haven't brought up yet, and that's the notion of the parasites, which is what I think those alien creatures were in that house in Bridgeport, and that we rub elbows with a number of times, including during exorcisms. I don't think they're servants of Satan or all that. That's our way of understanding them and putting them in terms that we can grasp. I think essentially these are multiversal creatures that eat by travel. Ben and I have actually seen them reaching from different worlds, negative events, and feeding on them. Weird as that sounds. Case in Pennsylvania, and UFOs were seen too. There was a spike in sightings. Maybe it had nothing to do with it, but I think it might. You had an act of violence going on in one world, and there was almost like an octopus reaching, and it was bothering people. Two girls who were living in an apartment in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, who believed they were being haunted by a demonic negative force, and it was actually this parasite. And in a third wave, you had a family whom the girl thought were ghosts haunting them. The ghosts thought the girls were ghosts haunting them, and they were both being fed upon by this parasite. And this is not uncommon. So I think that a greater understanding of this may be forthcoming in 1,000 years. One would hope that we would not go backwards, we'd go forward intellectually. And I think that science will have to evolve, including the scientific method, beyond the notion of matter and everything being material. This is fraught with danger, as any scientist would say, because the disciplined thinking of science is very important in any pursuit, and certainly the peer review as often occurs, but I think this all has to evolve. So provided we survive in our current form, or more or less, and we're honest with ourselves, I think that we will understand more about and be able to become aware more of the multiverse, where we are, what we're doing, without being judged to be nuts.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier about the genome, does any part of the unexplained genes that were found, could any part of that be sort of in speculation of like a hybrid type of situation? You hear people talk about the possibility of us being some type of hybrid, from way back. I know that's one of those quote-unquote fringe topics. Mm-hmm. But what are your thoughts about that?
Well, if you look at us, I've often wondered, are we indigenous to this planet? I mean, we're standing upright. Our stomach and our genitals are exposed. We should be on all fours. I mean, and like something took us out of the mainstream of evolution, seemingly. Again, I'm not an evolutionary scientist, and made us different. Why is it we have to wear clothes and live in houses and pay $400 a month to heat our homes when most of our fellow creatures have fur and all this stuff? I mean, what got us beyond that so that we don't seem comfortable in the natural environment unless we live in Tahiti or something? And so, which most of us couldn't afford to do. So these are all questions that perhaps will hint at perhaps some interference in our history, genetic history, particularly the missing or the extra genes. And of course, again, as not to rehash old territory, but did aliens land from Zeta Reticuli or whatever they call it and do this? Or did someone stumble in or deliberately break through a brain from a version of ourselves that's very almost identical and yet has had technology that would make us think they were gods. Maybe even not from another planet, maybe another version of our own planet. Of course, the wars of the gods, this has all been covered in very good shows like Ancient Aliens, which my wife has taken to watching, much to my amazements, and she never liked this stuff. I find it disconcerting that she's expressing opinions on this now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Your world is getting invaded.
I'll have to bring her into the lectures.
Yeah.
Family circus. So in any case, I think that if you want to call it hybrid, yeah. But again, I'll just repeat that unless they had stunning technology for gene splitting, they would have to be virtually identical to us to use their DNA to manipulate our DNA. So.
Yeah. Okay. Another question in the forum. Do you think the government will change their stance when questioned over UFO sightings since the Tom DeLonge announcement, specifically with the ex-CIA official Chris Mellon talking about the USS Nimitz case?
Okay, that is a complex question. As one who signed the security oath back in the day, I'm skeptical about some of this. First of all, as far as disclosure in general is concerned, I tend to be a skeptic because when's the last time you believed anything the government said? So as far as if they're going to release any information, is it true? Is it the whole truth? I mean, I just call me cynical, call me irresponsible, but I can't accept. I don't think I'd really have to see definite proof, whatever constitutes proof, that what they're saying is true. So I think that the whole disclosure movement is to some degree, with respect, is to some degree naive, and of course the question arises: does the government really know? I mean, and people don't consider the corporate factor in this. There's an awful lot of money to be made, and we've seen some evidence of that in some of our flat bearers. There's always somebody in there who seems to be studying it, and they have guns, not necessarily be the military. So these are all questions that I think have yet to be answered. But as far as the Nimitz case was concerned, and people talking, you're still responsible for. That security oath never dies. You're still responsible for maintaining, and you're still liable to prosecution. So I can only think that maybe there was some permission here or someone behind this who was letting information out. Of course, the Nimitz case, Alejandro talked about that at the beginning of the show, 2004, the tic-tac UFO and all this business. First of all, people have said to me, well, how can you keep, you got 2,000 people in the crew or something like that, a ship the size of the Nimitz, how can you keep all of them quiet? Well, they didn't necessarily see it. A ship's crew isn't all standing on deck watching the scenery all the time. I mean, there are people working in the engine rooms, especially on a supercarrier. You've got aircraft technicians below decks. You've got all kinds of things going on.
It's a whole city.
It is
mostly under deck,
and very few people are on deck at any one time. It would have been the personnel on the bridge, the officer of the deck, maybe the captain, et cetera, et cetera. But it wouldn't have been that many people who would have seen anything, even for hours at a time, because there are certain pipes or commands that are given, that stay off the weather decks. Is that in other words, don't go out, usually because of weather, but not always. There's something else going on. So I don't think there would have been that many people who would have seen it. Let alone photographed it. The CIC, or the Combat Information Center, which is a very significantly classified area, would have recorded it in some way. So I think that I don't know. I'm not really the DeLonge thing. I'm a little bit suspicious about it, but I'm suspicious of everything. I don't know, Tom. I don't. I'm not really connected with what's happening, but I'm skeptical about what it's for. Who has permission to do what, and what they actually know. And of course, they've been asking for money, which I find interesting as well. So
there's a lot of people talking about that in particular, and I think they're looking to do different things. I don't know if you followed the whole thing. They're looking to try to work on some type of advanced craft only from what has been observed, which I think is way out there personally. So I don't know if it's truly a nonprofit. I know Tom DeLonge, with his many millions, doesn't really need to raise money, particularly for himself. So I don't know exactly what the funding is for. It would be nice if they were a little more transparent about that part
Well,
of it.
my prime concern, to even beyond that, is are they going to push the envelope as far as our terms and our narrow paradigm is concerned, as we've discussed at length on the show here tonight? Is it a matter of are they going to have the same old tired approach, which is going to get us nowhere, or are they going to think new thoughts and get into some territory that's usually not dealt with as far as explanations and this sort of thing?
So I'm going to post this question up. If you can go ahead and read that, because I have no idea what he's saying.
What does Paul think of antediluvian or pre-Adamite theory? What are your thoughts on UPARTs? Well, antediluvian means before the flood, so this may be a biblical question.
Okay.
Okay. Pre-Adamite theory. You said that you, Martin, watched the show we did. We did a live show from the panel at the Exeter UFO Festival in New Hampshire in September. And one of the audience members stood up and said something about the world being 6,000 years old and this sort of thing.
And flat?
And
flat.
flat.
Yeah, you might as well do both at the same time.
So, it was Peter Robbins and actually it was Richard Dolan who kind of dealt with that, which I was very glad because, there's I don't know, I don't want to get into the biblical interpretation here, but there's really nowhere that it says that, and nobody in the ancient church interpreted it really that well. They did to a certain point, but and here's where we get into religion versus science. The church, and of course, when you say the church, it could be any one of 20,000 groups, and that's no exaggeration. There are literally 20,000 Christian groups that say they follow the Bible, although they all have different interpretations. You have the more traditional people of the book. You have the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christians, and then the Anglicans and the garden variety Protestants, and then the evangelical Protestants. The oldest really is the Eastern Orthodox Church, which very few people know much about. But people say, oh, that's all this, it's paganistic. And well, these are the Greeks who heard the gospel right out of the mouth of St. Paul. So. I think that cuts a little ice and gives them quite a pedigree. They were very open-minded to new ideas about what happened before the flood, the flood of Noah. They were very open-minded about the idea of what happened in paradise. And of course, if you look at Genesis, it indicates there were more people around at the time. If you look at the second chapter, because obviously. Abel married someone, and it says there were, he went to the land of the so-and-sos and all this. And I think these are, you're really going to trip yourself up if you worry about this kind of thing. The church traditionally, from all of its traditions, has always been open-minded to science. The Vatican did not burn Galileo with the stake. He was respected as a scientist. Most of the trouble these people had was political. You did have the Spanish Inquisition, which was a very unfortunate sort of blood. Well, it wasn't quite as blood-soaked as you have it, but it was very unfortunate, and there was an awful lot of terrible things that went on. The Orthodox were never involved in anything like that. The Orthodox and the Muslims are probably two of the most open-minded scientific groups from any period in history. And so, I'm not going to make excuses for the Roman Catholics or anybody else, or the Protestants too. But I think that you can't get the right answer if you ask the wrong question. And I think we need to be open-minded just as, if you're going to be a Christian, you need to be open-minded just as the early church fathers were. So that's the best I can answer.
Yeah. Here's a question that just popped up here.
Quote the scriptures you reference, please. As I see, I'm not going to do that because here we go. We're going to get bogged down. And this somehow doesn't happen on my show, Martin. People blaming me for not espousing their own religious beliefs. If you read, for example, I'll quote one for you. Gospel of Matthew, and it says probably the most misinterpreted passage in the whole New Testament, love your neighbor as yourself. You know what it says in Greek? The word sueton is in there. Love your neighbor because he is yourself. Now, isn't that different? So, go learn Greek, read it in Greek, or read the Old Testament in Hebrew. Of course, Gospel of Mark is written in Aramaic. So,
Well,
I'm not going to get into a duel over this.
Yeah, no problem. So Celeste wrote this to me, actually, and so this goes back to the Tom DeLonge thing we were talking about. Martin, if you read the 63-page investor document on To the Stars website, there's a lot of information. So thank you, Celeste. So anyone that listens to that, that heard our earlier comment about Tom DeLonge, Tom DeLonge seems to be in the news a lot in the UFO field. It seems like everybody's talking about that whole situation. I know you do other things, but have you followed any of that at all?
Yeah, I've followed. It's relatively recent. As I say, I don't know a lot about. I don't know him. I don't know a lot about it. I just, from past experience with groups like this, I wonder what it's really about. It's not up to me to question his sincerity. I have no reason to do that. I just, there are a lot of questions that hopefully will be answered as this project matures. The thing again with the security clearances, if there are a lot of people involved who had clearances, I'm skeptical in a way unless they have permission from someone high up, and that's not easy to get. To use declassified. Well, you don't need permission to use declassified information, but it seems to be kind of a muddle. Maybe it's just me. I just don't understand it properly. But again, that security oath stays with you for your whole life. And if people are just sort of coming forward, they're taking a big risk. Of course, today maybe things have changed. I don't know.
Yeah, I would think so. There was one in particular that was saying that he studied UFOs, which is pretty amazing since the Air Force supposedly got out of that, back in the 70s. So, yeah, that I can understand, what type of trouble he'd be in for talking about that.
Well, one of the things that's confusing is that projects are often renamed. We had Project Stargate that started, in the 60s, to mimic the Soviet program to work with psychics. And people say, it ended in the 90s. Well, we don't know that. It may have had a different name. Project Blue Book, Stanton Friedman will tell you that was a PR exercise, essentially. So, it's just, keep them guessing, keep them looking the other way. That's how it works.
Yeah. All right, here's this question here. How come the leakers never leak anything technical? Something that, without question, proves the government has alien technology. That's been his complaint with MJ-12.
Well, again, that's a good question. The leakers may be part of the agenda. As I say, leaking inaccurate information from accurate sources and vice versa. That's actually a technique that is considered rather important, at least in my day. It was back in the 80s. But I can't imagine that would have changed. Technical, I assume technically you mean nuts and bolts technology or technology that's beyond that. As we've said, there is some opinion out there that I happen to respect that at least some of these UFOs are not alien craft as such, but that they're living creatures, maybe. Something that would be beyond, as far as we know, our science. So there may very well be alien technology that is in the possession of the government or the corporate world or both. And so again, I don't really know since I'm not part of the in-crowd in that. But, as I say, with the security clearance, I think that there may be an agenda behind what is being released and why and when.
Yeah. A lot of people have speculated about, when it comes to government knowing or getting it into the private sector. I've noticed you mentioned that a few different times today, which actually makes sense. I mean, secrets could be kept a lot easier if it was kept in the private sector. And the question has come up many times on this show. Two guests posed in this way. Do you think the government actually knows what's going on when it comes to UFOs? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if you really want my thoughts on this, Martin, I'll have to get into something that is a little scary, maybe a lot scary. Wouldn't we love to weaponize the paranormal to make it appear that we can manipulate space and time in the face of an enemy? I think that if this multiverse thing is correct, that may be the big secret. I think we'd be very comfortable. We all grew up with Chewbacca and all these guys, I think we'd be very comfortable if we, not very comfortable, but we'd be intrigued. We wouldn't be freaked out if it were to be announced that there is life on, some of these exoplanets that have been discovered, if we had some way to know that. Even if they were visiting here in their craft, I think we could deal with that. However, despite any problems with alien microbes, or leaving that aside. However, if this multiverse thing is correct, and this stuff is right next to us all the time, and all possibilities are out there, including our fondest dreams and our worst nightmares, and if these parasites and things are next to us all the time and have access to our conscious worlds, I think that would really be scary. I just think it would be terrifying. And I think that may be part of the secret. Because, well, we've been threatened, because all of us, I think, have been at one point or another, and this sort of thing, you're too close to the truth or whatever. Because when in dealing with indigenous people such as the Australian Aborigines, I spent some time in 1979 with one of the elders, and he said that, you're on the right track. That's what we do as shaman. We go into these parallel worlds, get what we need, and bring it back and make it real. A physicist would call it collapsing the wave function. So this is a 30,000-year-old culture, and they know all about this stuff, at least from what he said. So I think that that's the scary part. I think that that might be the big secret, or part of the big secret. Militarizing the multiverse.
Wow. Yeah, that is scary. And I've always had kind of the thought that if UFOs were, say, in ETs instead of what you're talking about, or the possibility that maybe the government has the same amount of information we have, which is nothing.
Well, I'm not saying that the idea of nuts and bolts craft, or that they aren't being stored with alien bodies. I'm not saying that's not correct. I think that we have to consider other possibilities, and that all of these possibilities may be true, or none of them may be true. So
that's well put. So a little bit off topic here, but I remember you talking about this before. Someone wants to know if you have any updates on the mysterious farm in Litchfield County.
Okay, well, that's Litchfield County, Connecticut, and it's the Litchfield Triangle, or the Connecticut Triangle, as we sometimes talk about. I don't know what the listener's information is, or how updated it is. If she's been to one of our recent lectures, we always update people when we speak on this. We call it the Funny Farm. Essentially, it's an old farm. Now we discovered it in 2010. There was all sorts of military activity going on in the area. Ground troops, they didn't care who knew it. Excuse me. And this, of course, is the center of the Flatberry. And again, talking about militarizing the paranormal, how do you do that? You study it, and you have to go to where the intersect, overwash, and overlap points are between
sort of like the portals in a way?
Well, it could be portals. We think that it's bigger than that whole areas are affected by these overlaps of the brains of parallel worlds, where you might have different laws of physics, which is why I could stand in that kitchen in Bridgeport in '74 with those police officers and firefighters and watch the refrigerator float. There may have been an overwash of a world where the thing was almost weightless because of the laws of physics being very different. That's one thought. Rather than a ghost lifting the thing up, I don't think that's really what happened, because I didn't feel any presence at the time. So in Litchfield, we had this farm. There was no farming. It was all broken down, except for one building, which appeared to be a house. The military activity seemed to be present at this location, seemed to be the center. And we have found some of the most recent information involves some of my old contacts in the intelligence community. And we were told, again, after 2012, 2013, 2014, by 2015, the center building, the old barn, had been totally rebuilt. The two silos had remained standing for some reason. The place has the name of a farm, which is on a different mountain in Connecticut. And there's Connecticut state law that says two farms can't have the same name, believe it or not. Everything's fishy about the place.
Jeez.
And the doors look like they've never been opened. The building is empty from everything we can see. And yet there's a lot of excavation. There's some evidence of ventilation underground, perhaps. And underground bases, everybody thinks, well, you're paranoid. But the underground bases are not unusual in the global military community. I mean, there are a lot of underground bases. Whether that's what this is, we don't know. However, we learned a year and a half ago or so that the strange building across the road from this, the dirt road from this actual farm, where wires are going down, coming up out of the ground, going over to the farm, is owned by the U.S. Army. It's part of the GWEN, the Ground Wave Emergency Network, which is supposed to be rather chillingly a network for communication before, during, and after a nuclear war. However, the building is rather, there's a windowless building with cinder blocks, and there's an antenna painted as one would be at an airport, alternating red and white. Now, GWEN, there's another mysterious installation on Mohawk Mountain near here. There's an ordinary cell tower, and then there's this very strange thing. I don't claim to know what it is because my technology is 40 years old from the military. However, we have taken a lot of pictures, and they say it's broadcasting something. It's sending out. Our indication is that it's VLF sound waves, very low frequency sound waves, which have been known to influence human behavior. One of the areas that we've looked at in this triangle or flap area has been changes in public behavior. There was a period I'm sorry?
I said, really?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. One of the situations was in 2009 and 2010 when this military activity was going on. And then later as well, over the next few years, this behavior would alternate. It started with people driving on the wrong side of the road in numbers way beyond the statistical probability for the population of this area. When that was noticed in the press and in social media, it changed and people started driving off the road and hitting trees in ridiculous numbers. Then all of a sudden, when that was noticed, there were suicides in ludicrous numbers in this area. Very obviously very chilling. Now, whether I'm not saying it was connected, I don't know, but it's very suspicious with the presence of these things. And in many of the GWEN sites, there do seem to be these things that would broadcast these waves rather than just receive radio signals from any sort of military activity of that regard. So. There were people in 2009, 2010 would be walking their dog. And Mark D'Antonio knows about this because he lives in that area. And he cites the example of a friend who had fished in this one area all his life since he was a kid. And all of a sudden, Humvee pulls up. Guys with M16s get out and tell him gently but firmly that he could not fish there anymore.
Jeez.
There were people who would walk their dogs to the edge of their property, be stopped by people with M16s and said they couldn't do this. These people were either in camo or in black. So was this the military or is it corporate? The funny farm is owned by an absentee landlord who happens to own an aerospace company. So I mean, you line up the ducks here, and the circumstantial evidence is rather overwhelming that something weird is going on. We believe they're researching the multiversal factors involved in this flap area, and Ben has had some weird experiences there too. We had one occasion. There's one. You can see this video if you go to our Facebook page, the show Facebook page, Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. In 2010, the little boy at Point 1, we call it Point 1 of the Triangle, which was a 1793 farmhouse where our research began in 2005. We've been researching this case for 12 years. The little 4-year-old boy in the house said his invisible friend Ashwar was in the tree outside. So we were there with a film crew from New York. We were doing a pilot for one of our abortive TV shows. The networks always come back and say, in so many words, we're too intelligent, which I hope will change because I think people are sick of people screaming and running out of houses and all this business. And we pointed the infrared camera up into the tree, and you can see this video. It's the first video on the Behind the Paranormal Facebook page. Almost tadpole-like creature, whitish, coming down out of this tree about 6 seconds in, and vanishing in the last frame.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So was that Ashwar? I don't know. And our intrepid cohort, Shane Searway, happened to be doing some research and looked at some of the indigenous peoples of Latin America and Central America and South America. and found out that there in some cultures there is the word Ashwar, Achuar, which means the tree people or tree spirits.
Huh.
And this little boy said, Ashwar's people live in trees.
That is really bizarre.
So,
I mean, could that just be a coincidence? I mean, that's...
Oh, anything could be a coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence. I don't know about you, Martin. But,
when it comes to stuff like this.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, but a little 4-year-old boy in Connecticut, knowing the word Ashwar, that's kind of too much of a coincidence for me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Yeah. So anyway, this is all in this weird flap area where the funny farm is. So that's...
Now, how close can you get to that by car?
You have to know where it is.
Yeah.
The gate is...
But you could get there.
Well, we haven't been. Well, I shouldn't say. How do you cover a case of this scope? Our show has a series of reporters, and we have set up sort of a spy network in areas like this. We have 6 of these things kind of going around the world, and essentially we make sure they don't. If possible, make sure they don't know each other, so that there's no suggestibility involved, and they simply feed us information. One of our spies is one of our show producers, who is totally crazy as far as I'm concerned when it comes to this farm. And she will actually pull up, and she's actually walked in through the gate, which is almost never open. She's found it open on several occasions. And all she's really found in there was a dog, and there were 2 government-looking kind of vehicles that she sent photographs of. But it's very, and she's also with someone else kind of hiked around the edge of the property, and we have some plans to be working there with Mark D'Antonio about doing some other things which I really don't want to say for obvious reasons. But we've got a lot more plans to do some observing, and there are some. When I was in the military, actually, there were sensors and listening devices that actually look like the knots of trees that could be put on trees, strange as it sounds, and that was in the 80s. And I'll be darned if it's not some of the stuff that I've seen around that property. So we're going to be doing some work, and there's all kinds of stuff going on. But one of our contacts in the intelligence community checked the address and said, back off.
Really?
Yes. So
wow.
In other words, yes. Another one in Pennsylvania, he said, well, you got the wrong place, because there's always an equivalent place. We're working in the Pennsylvania Triangle as well, but that's only 2 years old. It may take us another 10 years to get to where the activity is centered. So anyway, but
wow.
that's the latest on the funny farm.
Yeah, the funny farm. I love that. So, Bob, just to let the listener know that listens to the Everything Else show, which is on Monday night. Not every Monday night, but mostly every week or every other week or so. I have Sam Moranto, who's actually been on this show a number of times. He's a UFO researcher in Chicago, but he's going to be doing a show on the Everything Else show about the Mothman case that's recently popped up in Chicago. And Bobby wrote me today and asked me to ask you if you knew anything about that.
Oh, actually, well, the Mothman, we made a study of that because that's one of the flap areas. The Ohio Valley, certainly in the Point Pleasant, Parkersburg area. One of the things about that is that our new book, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of, which came out in July, we managed to squeeze a little bit about the Mothman Chicago sightings, which had just starting in April, and we squeezed a few of them into the book before it went to press. So we have made a bit of a study. I haven't been out there ourselves yet. We hope to. We have some contacts out there and a few spies. What really, again, our terminology, you have to be careful. The Mothman was a term invented by the media to describe this really a bat-winged creature. It didn't really look like a big moth, at least not to most people. And one of the most accurate renditions of Mothman, replicated figures of Mothman is, believe it or not, the one that's in the town square in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, near the museum. That really matches the descriptions of what most people said it looked like. Very, very human, except with these wings and a funny head. The creature in Chicago has been described as very bat-like, and there have been more than one seen at one time. The case we recount in the book, several witnesses were by a marina on Lake Michigan, and they happened to see 2 huge bat-like creatures flying in the sky over the water. And so that's odd, too, 2 creatures instead of 1. So Mothman, I guess, is a convenient term coined by the press because they were going to call it Batman. But what happened was that Batman TV show with Adam West was you're about my vintage.
Oh, yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
you
yeah.
remember that. I thought it was really
Yeah,
dumb.
I met Adam West recently.
You did?
Yeah, he's a cool guy.
Oh, I
Yeah.
shouldn't have called the show dumb. But in any case, they were afraid of a giant lawsuit, so they didn't dare call it Mothman, Batman, so they called it Mothman instead. So that's where the term came. But again, that's our terms, whether it's the same creature, the same kind of creature, or whether it's predicting a disaster, which I have trouble with that idea. These are all open questions. So.
Okay, so now we're skipping around a little bit because I'm asking questions that have come in on the chat room. So Andy wanted to know what your thoughts on the afterlife as it relates to the multiverse. I think it's a good question.
Yes, it's a very good question. The multiverse, we say often, is anything that's possible, as we said, does exist somewhere in the multiverse. But death may not be possible in the multiverse by any stretch of the imagination. When you see Uncle George, skipping down the street 3 years after his funeral, you may be simply at an intersect point to a world where Uncle George never died. Okay, especially if he's skipping and he was old. I mean, there might be different laws of physics. Martin and I can testify to that. So I think death has no meaning. We refer to it as translation. Someone translated. If this multiverse thing is correct, you look at a tree outside your window, thousands, maybe more than that, of leaves. Well, one leaf falls off, so what? You're the whole tree, okay? There seems to be constant recycling. It's all simultaneous, if Einstein was correct. So you can't really have reincarnation because there's no past, so how can you have past lives? However, you can have parallel lives from what we see. One of the things that we always do, if we run into a regression therapist, someone who will hypnotize you and take you back to past lives, is we'll ask, do you ever run in, when you hypnotize someone, and hypnotism, that's another question, it's being rehabilitated now, do you ever run into someone who names a date in the future or describes a world that you don't recognize? And almost always they'll say, funny you should ask, yes.
Huh.
At first, they didn't know how to interpret that. Some say it's not common, but it does happen. So there is an increasing sometimes they'll say they'll give dates that are combinations of letters and numbers that they don't even understand, or they'll describe very, very strange worlds that they know are not from our past, at least so they believe. So again, the whole idea of parallel lives is now being accepted in the realm of regression therapy to some degree, although they don't really understand how to explain it. So I think that the afterlife is totally transformed by the notion of the multiverse. To make it even weirder, there are I think we all have examples. I have several examples of having been saved, literally. One, I was on a military operation and was saved by, I believe, by something that pulled me out from under 8 feet of snow. I couldn't breathe. It was a warm hand that literally pulled me out, and things like that. I think we all have stories similar to that, where we've been helped by something that wasn't us, but maybe it was us.
I've heard people talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it was us. Maybe it is us. Maybe we are our own guardian angel, other versions of ourselves in worlds where the laws of physics are different, and where we can be aware of ourselves. Maybe the people landing in UFOs that people see, maybe other versions of ourselves. I mean, these are all possibilities that I think we need to consider. Why is it that Mozart was able to sit down at the age of 4 and compose brilliant piano concerti? Sure, his father made him study like mad, but that doesn't necessarily explain it, does it? He may have been aware of where he already is, has no meaning, already is a brilliant composer and was in touch with that. There are many examples of prodigies and things of that kind.
Yeah, that are the prodigies that are just unexplainable.
Yeah.
And then also second languages. I mean, there's
sure.
Yeah, there's been a lot of things that just really make you wonder what the heck is going on. So actually, we are taking calls. If anyone wants to call in, it's 603-967-4030. Would love to hear from you. Ask our guest a question. And speaking of that, we have a question from Carl in the chat room. Do you think any of the atomic bomb testings and Hiroshima, Nagasaki in the late mid 1940s led to the modern UFO phenomena?
Well, that's a good question. Stan Friedman tends to think that has something to do with it.
Yep.
I love the way he puts it. He says, "Oh, how come they don't talk to us?" He said, "Well, why would they want to talk to us? We're a primitive species whose primary activity is tribal warfare." Exactly. And good old Stan, his feet on the ground. I think he's got a point. There's some belief, and particularly around the first UFO researchers of the 40s and 50s, that because we were able to destroy ourselves quite dramatically in this way, that they were here to save us or to monitor us at least. There are many examples, if you talk to high-ranking military personnel who will say this, including Colonel Halt from Rendlesham, that there's some evidence that there was some incursion into the weapon storage areas by strange craft, shining beams of light down. We've heard from several people who don't want their names mentioned that missiles were deactivated, or in one case retargeted by these craft. I'd like to know retargeted to where. We have a call?
Yeah, we have a call. Hello, caller. Welcome to the show. Please say your first name and where you're calling from.
This is Andrew Kenny. I'm calling from Stratford, Connecticut.
One of my homies.
All right.
Connecticut native.
How are you? Thanks for calling. You have a question for us?
Yeah, I had written it into the chat line, but then I thought I'd call. I've never called before.
Sure.
I just want a little more detail from Paul on what he thinks about how the multiverse ties into the fact that no matter where you are in the world or for outer space at this point, for that matter, when you die, you seem to, or everyone who's ever had a near-death experience, they seem to all instantly go to the next step and then come back. It doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Christian, agnostic. What are his thoughts on that, on the fact that everybody just seems to share that experience? Is that part of your soul journey, or is it related more closely to the way that the universe is structured? And then I'll take your answer off the air.
All right. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's something that I think all of us wonder what will happen when we die. Are we going to be okay? Well, the near-death experience is very interesting. Everyone actually does. Most people have the experience you described, but not everyone. Some people have terrible experiences. I had a very weird thing that might have been considered a near-death experience. My heart was fibrillating. I had a very serious case of pneumonia. I was on the way to the hospital. All of a sudden, I saw a giant lizard. Now, that sounds pretty horrible, but it was beautifully colored, and I felt very peaceful. Now, maybe that's how weird I am. I don't know, but then I felt very much at peace. It was a beautiful experience, the last thing I would have expected. But as far as transitioning, near-death experience, I mean, I don't see any reason. I think it's legitimate because if you believe evolution, things develop in our psyches and in our bodies for survival purposes. I mean, what's the survival value of a near-death experience? I mean, your body's dying, but what would be the point? So perhaps a transition, yes. The thing I think that if this multiverse thing, at least the way we approach it, is true, is that you are already living parallel lives. If there is a transition period from one part of our consciousness to the next, sure. There is a thing called, well, we call it the flashing nexus. And I started running into this in the late 1970s when people would describe it. And it doesn't seem to be common, but and it doesn't always take place in cases of medical trauma. Occasionally, someone is just in a waking life and this just happens. But frequently, it is on the operating table or whatever, but you really can't call it a near-death experience. As one man described it, he was on the table. He wasn't even under yet, anesthetic. All of a sudden, he was the doctor. And he said he had all his memories, all his imagination. He said, and he joked, he said, it was a good, darn good thing because he's looking down at himself about to do something. And then all of a sudden he was a nurse. And then he was someone out in the hallway. And he was someone driving by in a car outside the hospital. What the hey is this? And we've run into that. So it's like we have parallel lives, if that's what this is. We have these parallel lives. But there seems to be a central core, which is the nexus, the term that we use, flashing nexus. The nexus is our central core of consciousness, which might not just be your core of consciousness, so that you maybe pass through from one conscious state to another, just becoming your prime conscious, or whatever you want to call it. It may be different for different people depending on their awareness and even their spiritual advancement. But this core may be what you're experiencing during a near-death experience. That's really about all we know. But when people write to our show and say that they've encountered other versions of themselves, in the 70s I was encountering this, and that's what really made me question the old idea of ghosts as spirits of the dead, because it didn't seem to be good enough. Why are they wearing clothes, driving cars, or in our case, in one case, driving by in ox carts, yelling "Hya" and cracking a whip, and we couldn't see it. Why are these so physical? I think because they are parallel versions of other people, even of ourselves. We've talked to people who've walked into the kitchen and see themselves sitting at the table or at the island in the kitchen. These are all things that indicate possibly the multiverse and other versions of ourselves. So you're already at the other end of that tunnel, I think. And you're simply translating. We use the word translation, not death. It's a very ancient theological term. And I think that's essentially it. But death is really not possible in any sense, not even for the body, if you take this to its, I'm not going to say logical because it's not, conclusion. So those are our thoughts on that.
So the Mandela effect, that's very similar to like alternate realities?
Well, yes, possibly.
Someone had that question up on the chat.
Yeah, well, the Mandela effect, which I have done some shows on, is essentially, the name comes from Nelson Mandela.
I wondered about that.
Yeah, and I thought Mandela, the kind of art thing that's very multiversal the Tibetans do, but no, it's Nelson Mandela. And he essentially was, if anybody doesn't know who he is, you should, he was a very gallant civil rights advocate in South Africa, which had a terrible system of racial apartheid, as they call it. And he spent 20 years in prison and ended up a president.
When he got out.
He ended up president of South Africa, and a rather good one. And he lived until his 90s. However,
and people thought he was dead.
Yeah, people remembered him dying in prison.
Right. And
this resulted in this was from a conversation a bunch of people had, and they said, well, this is really weird. How come we have different memories? Now, as Martin will testify, you get to be our age, maybe sometimes you have confabulation or other things, but is it really confabulation? Is it parallel memories of things that are actually going on, and your mind is more in touch as you get older? I like to think that's the case rather than you're just losing it. So that's what the Mandela effect is. It's different people having different memories. Now, raising two boys, including my co-author and co-host Ben, who's now 25 and married, we would love the Berenstain Bears. Now, one of the classic Mandela things that people will say, oh, well, people remember it's spelled Berenstein or Berenstain. I remember Berenstain. And supposedly, and I'd like to prove this, the books I have, we still have the old book, say Berenstain. Now, if it's a different, if there have been, one of the things with this is that when it comes to the multiverse, it's not we're in one world and that's where you stay, and a world will jostle and you'll see what we think is a ghost and all this. We're passing through perhaps even millions of parallel worlds in a day, say. Like when you get up this morning and you maybe tripped over something on your way to the bathroom.
How'd you know?
Really?
Yeah, no, just kidding.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever. There was a world where you did that.
I know.
Okay,
yeah.
And one where you didn't, okay, that's fine too. So these are all things that happen. And when you made choices, supposedly you literally will create another universe. So this tree, as it were, is splitting off millions and millions of branches really every second as people make choices. And this is what shamans in Australia and Quebec in 1979 essentially described to me as the tree of creation that they have recognized for tens of thousands of years. So, again, I think that has a pedigree. So we would, for example, there was a case in Willimantic, Connecticut some years ago, back in the 90s. And they said, oh, we're hearing footsteps on our steps and it's driving us nuts. And we're seeing UFOs, strange lights in the sky outside the house. So again, another evidence that maybe there's a connection. Well, I went to the house and I heard these footsteps. And sometimes they don't record, but in this case they did. And on a hunch, I told the guy, go on up to the top of the stairs, because I slept in the living room one night and I heard the stairs in the morning and had the tape going. He came down the stairs and said, whatever, it was exactly the same sound. I think that it was a recording of him in a close parallel world, because he came down every morning. The more times you do something, a habit really is you're doing it in many, many different worlds. And I think that was a small example that perhaps we're dealing with the right idea in this multiple worlds thing. So I just think that's what we're dealing with, and the Mandela effect may very well be part of that.
Yeah. I've seen something similar to the Mandela effect before. And it had to do with the death of another actor, and I'm trying to remember who it was, where everyone just assumed he was gone, but he was actually still alive. I don't know if you... So it isn't just Nelson Mandela. Maybe part of it has to do with rumors on the internet or something like that, too.
Yeah, the information overload that we have.
Yeah.
However, I remember as a kid, before there was an internet, long before that, as you know, Mark, people would gather at our house and old friends, and they'd have, occasionally, I remember different memories of certain things, although not a lot. So the information overload, I mean, I've heard a statistic that people say is true, that we receive more information in a day than our ancestors received in a lifetime.
We definitely could take it. If we
you could argue that.
Take it in.
Yeah. So you have to consider that as well. I mean, you always look at a mundane explanation before you look at a weird one.
Plus, we think like something like 40,000 different thoughts a day on top of the new information that we can take in. That's a lot.
That's why you meditate.
Yeah, there you go.
Keep it quiet.
Someone wanted to know, this is a little bit off topic, and I don't know if this has anything to do with you or not. Have you ever crossed paths with Richard Doty back in the 1980s? Do you even know who he is?
Yeah, I never did. I don't know much about him. I was
the
involved.
Paul Benowitz case, and yeah.
Yeah, I did know Ted Sirios.
I know that name.
Yeah, thoughtography, he called it. He was quite the character. He was even known to the police. However, he was able to look in, and I never saw any reason to disbelieve that he could do this. Look into the lens of a camera, and what he was thinking would come out on the film. There were times he didn't even have to use a camera; just look at a packet of film back when you had that, even Polaroid film, and it would come out. Some scene he was thinking it would come out on the film.
Okay.
So whatever it was pretty weird. I saw him do it.
Yeah. There's supposed to be a guy now in, Denmark, I think it is, that's doing this over and over again. And there was actually a woman I had on my show one time, and I'm just trying to remember who she was, that specializes in crop circles funded by the Rockefeller, eventually, Foundation. Do you know who I mean in Boston?
Oh, I think I know her, but I can't think of her name. I don't like to speculate on the air.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But so she's doing a lot of work with this guy, and it's really weird. You can go on the website and see all types of images. He's conjured up, different people's faces and things like that. Really bizarre stuff.
This was the essence of Project Stargate. Believe it or not, that's what it was actually called, and then it's transmogrified several times. But the Soviets were experimenting with psychics to see if remote viewing, they could view enemy targets, they detonate ordnance, things of this kind at a distance, and so the U.S. was doing the same thing. And there was some success, as I understand it, but obviously it's classified. And the thing is, I had a clearance, but that doesn't mean you know anything. It's mission specific, and it's need to know only. So it's not like you have a clearance to know all this stuff. So.
Yeah. Speaking of crop circles, is that something you've ever? I'm kind of on the fence about those, but I don't really know. Is that something you've ever done a show on?
Oh yeah, sure we have. We've done shows.
Out of 700 shows, you must have covered it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Believe it or not, there's still things we haven't really covered.
Really?
We're just about to do a show on Kecksburg within the next few months, and we had never done one on that specifically anyway. So our fears 10 years ago that we'd run out of subjects, just the opposite has occurred. I'm sure you could say the same thing, Mark.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
it's crop circles. I was very frustrated that I was in England in 1989 chasing down the beast of Exmoor, as they called it, with a bit of flair, which was actually a big sort of mountain lion type creature. There's another story behind that. And I went right by a field in Wiltshire on the way to Devon where there was a crop circle, and I didn't even know it. Like a dope, I could have stopped and, could have seen it. But we've talked a lot with Jennifer Stein and others, and of course Linda Moulton Howe, and a number of other folks who specialize in crop circles. I've only seen one once, and that was in Canada, in Ontario, where they seem to have a lot of them. And it's fascinating, but I think it's muddled. It's like photography in the paranormal today. I mean, with Photoshop, you can do anything. You can put Godzilla in a photograph, and somebody's going to believe it. The honesty level is something you have to be very careful of. There are other vortices, sort of meteorological phenomena that might account for some of them. And there are whole organizations of people who consider themselves artists who will create crop circles. On the other hand, there are some that supposedly have been seen in the presence of strange lights. I don't know about that, but there are some that are of great beauty and intricacy that you can't imagine anybody could do in one night without being seen. So I don't know. It's as with everything else in the paranormal, it's maybe the first day of school, and there may be something more to it than we realize, or maybe not.
So why don't you talk about? You have a book coming out real soon, right?
Well, actually, it just came out in July. If there's one coming out real soon, it may have an example of the Mandela effect, because I don't know about it. All right.
Okay.
We're trying to establish the Behind the Paranormal series. Last year, November, from Schiffer Books came Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. That's in most stores. You can Barnes & Noble, you can get it. Then in July, Schiffer let us out of our contract a little because we had to speak at an event, and we wanted this book, because all the children were asking for it, although it's not a children's book. The one I just mentioned, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard of. And we get into some of the UFO Bigfoot connections in there. And that came out in July from Barking Cat Books, which is one part of our own family media company. And we resurrected it in order to get the book out in time. So that's Amazon Kindle and Amazon. It's not in stores yet. So that may be the one they're referring to. The next one, I think we're going to, and Ben and I are still talking about this because we write them together, my son and I. We may be Behind the Paranormal 3, the UFOs, the paranormal, and God.
Wow.
Because there's such an interest in that.
Yeah.
And we're going to bypass flat-bearers and everything, and maybe get into that. So some of the stuff we talked about tonight.
Hey, well, it's been a pleasure, and thanks for driving all the way up here from Woonsocket.
Well, I love Maine, so you gave me a great excuse.
Yeah, and you're gonna hermit yourself out here and do a lot of work, I heard. So.
I brought a whole pile of work, and I was speaking in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on Saturday. Ben's going to meet me there at the public library, and there are quite a few people signed up, as I understand. So I'll just, thanks to your hospitality, be here a couple of days, get some work done, and then head right down to Portsmouth on the way back to my lair in northern Rhode Island.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, so next week we have our guest. Every once in a while, I will bring a skeptic or even a debunker on, and this guy has his own thoughts on what happened to Betty and Barney Hill. Jim McDonald will be on next week. Some people will like it, some people will hate it. It should be an interesting show overall. All right, everyone, so thanks a lot, and thanks for supporting the show, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.